Hi, this is Mahan again. I'm going to be continuing the fall 2019 midterm exam. I'm going to go on to question 2, and I put my headphones in for this one so you don't have to hear me clicking so much. I did not realize how loud that was. Okay, so we're just going to go over the second question now. So it says that this data contains a text box named SZ and this form named F2. And basically the text box is just whatever input the user has or whatever you type in there. And so what they want us to do in this question is retrieve that value of SZ, so whatever value the user inputted. And then if the value is even, then we're going to display an alert that says the size has to be odd, so this number should be odd. And then we're going to set the div block to an empty string. And then if the value is odd, then we're going to follow through. We're going to make a table. And once we find out that the value is odd, we'll be able to kind of format it to get these white spaces as well, and then just place it in the div block. So essentially, this is what it should look like. Say you put in odd number. Oh wait, this is actually the wrong one. Okay, this is the right one. So you put in an odd number, it gives you a 17 by 17 table. And then if you put in an even number, it's going to say that size has to be odd, and it gives you an empty block. So let's start with the first question by retrieving the value SZ from the text box. So we're going to call SZ, and we're going to say document dot. It said that we have the form is called F2, and the text box is SZ. So F2 dot SZ dot value. Now this line is partially done because if you remember from the last question, when you have anything in this text area, it's going to be put in as a string value, but we're going to be working with this number in order to create that table. So like we need to know that 13 is a number to create a 13 by 13 table and not 13 is a string value. So in order to do that, we're going to use parse int, that function, to turn the string value or turn anything in the parentheses into an integer. So we parse int and then we retrieve the text input. So we completed the first question, and the second question is saying if the value of that number is even. So it tells us right there that we're going to use an if statement. So how can we determine that SZ, or how can we create a condition that checks if SZ is even or not? So at the bottom of this question, it gives us a hint, and it says if this number, and then the mod function, I think it's called mod, it just calculates, it's used for remainder division. So if that equals 0, then that number is even. So pretty sure it's called mod. If you do the number and then the remainder or the percentage sign 2 equals 0, then you can see basically what this does is that this value, it looks to see if this value divided by 2 has a remainder of 0. And so it's a lot more efficient than just doing regular if this divided by 2 is an even number, because that would be more manually, this value would have to continuously divide by 2 until it gets to a remainder of 0. But this one just checks immediately if the number divided by 2 is 0 only. And so then you can see that it is, or if that's true, then we'll move on. So we're going to be displaying the alert and setting out the div block to empty string. So it's pretty simple. In order to create an alert, all you do is type alert, and then it asks us to say size must be odd. Size must be odd. And then we set it to an empty string. So we're going to do p2 underscore out dot inner HTML is equal to an empty So that's all you have to do if this holds true. And then if it doesn't hold true, then that means that the number is odd, and we can go on to our else statement. So it says right here, if the value SZ is odd, then we're going to create a table with SZ rows and SZ columns. So within this block, we can start creating our table. And just like in the last question, you always open up your OS to the table first. So we're going to open up a table tag, say the border is equal to 1, and cell spacing is equal to 0. We just opened up the table tag, and now we can start creating our rows and columns. So in order to create a row, we're going to need to use a for loop. This is because we're working with multiple rows and multiple columns, so it's just easier to use a for loop that will quickly generate them instead of you having to manually enter it. And another thing is we don't know what the number that the user inputted. So using a for loop is a safe bet. So I is equal to 0. I is less than, so I is going to be less than the SZ number. This is because when you make your row, the row has to be, it says the table is SZ rows by SZ columns. So that number has to match the number that the user inputted. Since we don't know what it is, we're just going to use the variable and then I plus plus. Another thing to note is that you don't have to put sz.length because right here, remember we did a parse int on it, so it's just an integer value at this point. So we don't need to do the length. All right, so once you open up your for loop, you can do OS is equal to OS plus, and then open up your row tag by using TR in brackets, or yeah, in these little tag brackets. And then within that, we're going to create the nested for loop in order to start building our columns. So we're going to use J. J is going to equal 0. J is also less than SZ because remember it's the same number of rows by same number of columns, and J plus plus. Just going to space it out. A little easier to read. Okay, and so we have, now we're to the point where we're going to start making our cells because we have the column loop open. So it says right here that if a cell is in an odd number row or an odd number column, then we have to do these 3 things. However, if it's not, then we're going to create an empty cell. So we already know that, like, if we're at this point of the problem in this else statement, we know that the number of rows and the number of columns is an odd number. But we want to see where are we within the table. So like which row we're on, which column we're on. And if it is an even number, then we're going to do one thing. So, and then if it's an odd number, we're going to do another thing. So by doing this, we're actually able to start creating these like blank spaces within the table. So we're going to need to do another if statement because we want to see whether we're on the even row or the odd row. So we have an if statement, and then we're going to have an else statement. So with the else statement, it tells us that we're just going to create an empty cell. So we can actually just do that right now. OS is equal to OS plus, and then you will open up your TD tag, and we're going to set the width equal to 15 because I'll explain in a second. Height is equal to 15. And then we'll just close the cell as well. So In this first part, it says that we're going to set the cell width and height to 15 pixels and set the background color to light gray. But however, if that's not the case, we're just going to make an empty cell. We still want it to have the same width and height as the cells that are in the odd number rows, because we are making a table and we want them all to be equal number of, like, the size to be equal. So let's go into this if statement. So how do we determine what to put in the parentheses or what conditions to have? It tells us that if the cell is in an odd number row or an odd number column. So the or is really important because that shows us that we have two conditions, two separate conditions, and because there's an or in between them, only one of the conditions have to be met for this to be true. And so if you remember in Java, there's the or conditional statement and the and so and you use these two, but with or we're going to use the two pipes. And then on the left side, we'll have one condition, and on the right side, we'll have another condition. So it said row is odd or column. So what was the variable for row? It was I. So we're going to do I parentheses 2, and we're going to follow the same way how we did it in this first part. And then, except we're comparing the rows and the columns. So we will use J to represent the columns is equal to 0. And so what happens if this is true? Then it says that we are going to create a cell. So open it up, and we're going to have the width is equal to 15. The height is equal to 15. And it also said that we will use the attribute BG color and set it to light gray. So BG color is equal to light gray. And then we can close that, and then we will just close out the cell with the closing tag. All right. So we did complete that part, and so once we have created these cells, we can leave the nested loop and we can close our row. And then once we've closed our row, we'll leave that loop and we'll close out the table. And then we can do place a table in a div with the ID of p2 underscore out dot inner HTML and set that equal to the OS. Okay. So yeah, you want to make sure that you do these two items while you're still in the else, because, oh, and actually I forgot to put the main bracket. Let me just reformat that. The reason why you want to put those last two in the else statement is because if it wasn't in the else statement, that means that the value would have been even. And if the value, like the SZ value is even, then we wouldn't have even made the table. We would have just had that alert thing come out and tell us you need to use an odd number. So and we already have the P2 underscore out. We already have that display right here. So you don't want to have this second display also within like the if statement of it being even. So this is representative that, or this is basically indicating like, yes, you use an odd number. So all of this is going to be in the section of the else tag. Okay. So now we can see if that will work. Oh, really? Okay, I accidentally copied the bracket. Okay, so now let's see if this will work. Okay, so let's save it. Open it up in a browser. So let's start by putting an even number in there, because the size must be odd. And let's just put in 13. And we have a 13 by 13 table, 17 by 17. Okay, so that concludes the second question. And then my previous video showed the first question, how to get this table and calculate the total downloads. And I hope this coding time was helpful. And if there's anything that you need clarification on, just let me know. And thank you so much for watching.